You have the cameras rolling?
Welcome to Outspoken,
This better be good.
a show about
Floods, mutant, plagues, man-eating plants.
actually, it's about thought-provoking, compelling conversations with people who have something important to say, a good story to tell, or knowledge we can learn from.
Oh, good for you!
And now,
Hold on to your butts.
here's Scott and Curtis.
Hello and welcome to Outspoken. I'm Scott and I'm here with my co-host Curtis. Hey Curtis, how you doing?
Hey, Scott. I'm very excited to have your friend Frank here today. This is quite a pleasure, Frank. It's been a while. What 3 years, I think?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So just making sure today we have a super special guest, a friend, a mentor, someone who went from roofer and carpenter to CEO of one of the most recognizable casinos in the world, and someone I'm definitely honored to call a friend, and that's Frank Riolo. Frank, thanks for joining us on Outspoken today.
Thanks, Scott. It's nice to be here. Nice to see you again.
Hey, good to see you too. So let's see, where should we start? Where should we start with Frank?
Well, let's see. Roofer and carpenter to CEO. It's a bit like Jesus, wouldn't you say, Frank? Your sort of
No,
career
I
path.
while I am working with a group, we're growing grapes, but I can't make wine and I can't drink wine. I can't absolve you from your sins. You're on your own.
So if you can't tell, so Frank's from San Diego, or born and raised in San Diego, but he's not in San Diego. He's up in Sonoma. Yeah, Sonoma. So Frank, tell everybody why you're up in Sonoma. What's going on up there?
Well, I have, as you know, we're very
Yep.
well from our common journey together through getting initiated into working with Native American tribes. We started in California, but then throughout the country. I've stayed doing that, even though I've had some, different directions in my pathway since then. But for the last 17 years, I've been working with a tribe up in Northern California called Rancheria, and they are from the Alexander Valley in Sonoma County, and I'm up here with them. They were a tribe that was disbanded in the 1950s when the policy in the U.S. was to terminate tribes as many as possible. They were a small rancheria tribe on a small piece of land in the Alexander Valley, and they were terminated. And the tribe was attempted to be dispersed, but they managed to hang together, and they kept their government together, and they kept their culture together. And they were one of the group of tribes called the hardworking tribes, which Hardworking was a tribal woman that initiated suits on behalf of the tribes, a number of tribes across the U.S., but quite a few in California. And they were disbanded in the early 50s. And they finally won their lawsuit to be re-recognized in 2004.
Wow.
It's been a huge amount of time. And once they were recognized, they became a federal tribe again, and they had certain rights under recognition, but they were landless. But they wanted to return to the Sonoma County, where their heritage is from, and their culture, and their thousands of years of existence. And they were able to do that. They were able to get a casino down in the Oakland area, and then start accumulating land, because they weren't given any land when they were recognized. So they were able to buy some land, and now after 15 years of working on it, we're in the process of building a reservation for them. So we're building the first phase, 146 homes, community center, office buildings, all the infrastructure for them in a little town right near Hillsburg.
So
Have you
Frank-
pulled together a group of investors to do this, Frank?
No, no, tribe's doing it all on their own.
Wow.
Tribe has when they won their recognition, one of the things that comes with that is the ability to operate gaming. So they were able to establish a casino in the and some reservation land in the little town called San Pablo, which is about 10 miles north of Oakland.
So there's a little bit of background to that for everybody listening, that Frank was one of the original author for the compacting in California. And
Now you're giving me way too much credit. I was not one of the original authors.
I thought you were the original author.
No, the one of the original group, the original compacts were attempted to put together when we were still at the bank.
Okay.
So I had input into the group, but I wasn't in the room with them. While the tribe we worked with, Viejas, was heavily involved in that. And you know me, I've never authored anything original in my whole life. I'm a good editor and I'm a good idea guy, and I could take somebody else's thoughts and put them into something else. But I haven't done anything original ever. But
So
I wasn't involved in that.
Okay, fair enough. I'll give you that. But I just want to warn everybody right now, where Frank starts to kick the dirt with his boots and put the straw in his mouth and go, "Oh shucks, I really didn't do anything." Just watch out. I'm going to say it right now. Watch out. Okay, so for everybody in the audience, Frank is from San Diego originally, and he's spending the summer up in Sonoma. So Frank, how's the new place up there?
It's awesome.
It's awesome. Great.
It's right in the middle of a vineyard, surrounded by 20 acres of grapes and about 40 olive trees and a couple of fig trees. It's a second generation Sicilian's idea of what Italy's supposed to look like, and where you're supposed to go to die, I think.
Awesome. So
That's great.
Frank, what brings you up to Sonoma? Go ahead and tell me.
I'm up here because I'm working with the Linden Rancheria, which is a Native American tribe, and historically from the Alexander Valley in Sonoma County. And they were a tribe that was one of the smaller tribes that was grouped into the U.S. policy in the 50s, which was termination. So they really had a policy that was to try and reduce the number of tribes, to try and assimilate tribal people into the mainstream. Terrible policy, failed policy, but they unfortunately were caught up in that, and their tribe was terminated.
So just to be clear, Frank, termination, I mean, that's a very strong sounding word. I want to make sure we understand what we're talking. Termination means the recognition of the tribe legally.
Yeah, they're no longer recognized. So basically, historically, you're going to end up with way more Indian history than you ever want to know here. But historically, tribes are the equivalents of states. So they're like domestic nations within the U.S. So they have sovereignty. They can control their own laws and their own operations within the boundaries of the reservation.
Almost like a foreign embassy, the territory on the foreign embassy.
It's really more the equivalent of a state.
Okay.
So they have effectively the same rights of the state. So on a reservation, the laws of the state do not apply to the tribe. The tribe.
Interesting.
With that, but there are a ton of intergovernmental agreements between tribes and states and tribes and counties, and all federal law applies. So it's effectively they're the same as the state. When you lose that federal recognition, you have and your land on a reservation is held into trust for the tribe by the U.S. government. So they're effectively the only reservations in the U.S. are military reservations and Indian reservations, Native American reservations. So you end up with this kind of situation where if you lose your recognition, then you no longer have sovereignty. So your land is, if you have land, it's just fee land, and they cut it up and they give, like if we were in the same tribe and they were trying to terminate us, they'd arbitrarily give you 5 acres and me 5 acres and Scott 5 acres, and then we have to pay property tax to the county. All the county rules apply. We're just no longer recognized. when termination effectively means the tribe's terminated, it doesn't exist anymore, and
You
all
said
those
that the Lytton
benefits don't
band,
exist.
but the Lytton band, you said stayed together and then did what?
Yeah, they remained together, and then they joined and sued the federal government with a group of other tribes because they believed they were illegally terminated, and it was in violation to all of law and as well as treaty rights. And they filed that. Those suits started being filed in the 50s and early 60s, and they took somewhere between 40 and 60 years to finally be resolved. And all of them were, and the majority of them were resolved in the tribe's favor, and the ones that really weren't had some other issues with them, or tracing lineage, whatever. But this tribe was re-recognized. But when they were re-recognized, all it said was, "You're now a federally recognized tribe, but we're not giving you any land, and we're not giving you any money. We're just giving you recognition." But with that becomes the sovereign right to operate gambling. And so they were able to, together with a small group of investors, and buy 9 acres of land in Oakland or San Pablo, outside of Oakland, and establish a casino. And then with that, get some money, and then buy the land up here to build the reservation. So they are now finally starting to have a reservation. They've never lived together since the 50s.
Wow.
And this is the original land that they were able to take into trust, or different?
No, different. They were not allowed under the Congressional Act of the settlement, law court settlement, to go back to the original land.
Wow.
So they're in the vicinity, but they're not on the original land. Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Mm. How did you get started in that world, Frank?
I got started by accident, actually.
All the best stories start that way.
Yeah, I was a small time home builder contractor. My dad and I, in a little town called Borrego Springs, which is about 100 miles from nowhere. It's east
go to
of
San Diego and go east into the desert.
Go east into the desert. And if you find a place where you can't get there, you can almost not get there from anywhere, that would be Borrego.
And
I started there, and I was working as a contractor and a carpenter with my dad, a contractor, and I was bored. I was young, bored, so I got involved in the community and doing things. And one of the things about it was a really unique community because it's the headquarters for a 500,000 acre state park.
Wow.
And it had that Palm Springs like kind of climate and locale, prettier than Palm Springs because of the park location surrounding, but not the economy of Palm Springs. So very small town, 1,000 people when I went there. But it had a winter population that would swell it up a couple of thousand, and it was mostly a lot of Canadians, a lot of people from really successful people that had wanted a quiet place to live, didn't want to go to Palm Springs for the winter and play golf, and so it had some really super wealthy, super educated people, and it had a lot of migrant Hispanics that had crossed the border, and
we used to call them snowbirds in Texas.
Yeah, they're snowbirds. Yeah, they're snowbirds.
Frank, don't gloss over that part, because I think you always told me that there was such a huge advantage to growing up in a small town and how that really helped pave the way for you. Can you kind of elaborate on that?
Yeah, I can. You recognize things only after you don't go there looking for them. You just find opportunities. And what I realized is that I would be out in the back digging a ditch or framing a patio, and the guy I was working for was the chairman of the board of United Airlines, or the CEO for May Company, or at
Wrigley's.
that time Wrigley's. The Wrigleys were there. There was all these really super wealthy people. And again, it's a small town in the middle of nowhere, and there's no entertainment. People get together, and have dinner, and they talk, or they like to go out in the desert and tour around. And I literally, when I went there, I'm 25.
Mm.
And I am the only person in business under 50 in town.
Wow.
And the only other people there that are even in my age bracket are park rangers or school teachers.
Wow.
And so there's probably like 15 people, right? There's not many. And when I would work, the people were really nice, and they would come out and talk to me, and then they'd invite me over for dinner. And then,
Nice.
then you become their friends. So I became friends with all of them, interact with them. A bunch of them started mentoring.
Nice.
And I got some great mentors between my dad and a guy named Paul Carter and Ed Mangiafico. There's a ton of them. They were just really nice, awesome people. And they literally would try to teach you what you would need, because I was involved in the community, right? And I don't know anything. I was kind of aggressive and
sharp elbows.
Not real polished, right? It's like the answer, well, there's only clearly one answer, and it's right, and it's mine, and what the hell's the matter with you, right? And they started, like, hey man, giving me that education polish, and I watched them.
Yeah.
I would get them involved in things, and I'd watch how they do it. It's like, wow, that was way easier than what I was doing, right?
Can you share it before you move on to the other benefits, Frank? Could you share a lesson or two aside from the sharp elbows, reining in sharp elbows, which I had to learn that lesson quite a bit too. So something else that you took away from some of those mentoring sessions?
Actually, the one that I think that I've never, benefited a lot from was a gentleman named Paul Carter. And Paul had started from nothing as an insurance sales guy, and he ended up being the U.S. president of Merck. I mean, he was a big player, and I got him involved in a couple of things, and we would go into a board meeting, and we would talk about ahead of time everything was going to be on the agenda, and we were cooking it, right? I already knew how he was going to support it. He taught me how to work the room to where you had everybody individually lined up before you asked the question.
Mm-hmm.
But we'd go into these meetings, and I would put out this deal, and he would ask me a bunch of questions, and he would tell me he thought it was a really bad idea. And then he would walk you all the way around the room on this decision tree, right? And to where he comes out, he goes like, you know what? This is absolutely right. This is great. And everybody in the room would go, oh my God, this is awesome, right? It's like, oh yeah, we're totally on board. It was like, so man, I've used that the rest of my life, because that is
like a good defense attorney. Yeah.
Okay, let me tell you about Paul Carter. Paul Carter was the kind of guy that he didn't say anything almost the whole board meeting, and then he'd finally talk at the end, and everybody would lean in, and then because that's just the way he was. But I'll tell you the other side of Frank and Paul's thing. So I go talk to Frank, and I'd say, Frank, I want to pitch this thing. It's really important. I was like, Frank, but later, and like 10 years later, same sharp elbows, probably just a pain in the ass. And I wanted something to happen, and I would be talking about it, and I think I'd have Frank convinced. And I'd go into the meeting, and the first thing Frank would do is he'd look at me and go, I don't think that's a very good idea. Piss me off. I was so mad. And then I watched how they would, between him and Paul, they would work it all the way back to where it would work. And I'd be like, and it only took me only 5 or 6 times, right, Frank? Got it. But man, that used to piss me off.
Yeah. Actually, that you brought up at a point. The other thing that I learned from it was is I used to, because you're impatient, right? You're young, you're impatient. I would go in a meeting and people would be talking about the problem, and I'd be sitting there and like, what the hell? And like, what are we doing? All this? It's like, it's really easy. You just do this.
Yeah. Yeah.
And everybody would tell you, oh my God, that's horrible. That'll never work, blah, blah. And I watched Paul, and Paul would sit there until they completely buried themselves into like, well, we don't know what to do. And he'd go, well, hey, what if we did this, blah, blah. And everybody go, oh my God, that's awesome. Let's do that. They'd vote the meeting to be over. Yeah. And I have done that forever since then. It's like, I'll sit there till they're completely dead. And then we'll give you my whole reasoning, and everybody goes, oh my God, yeah, let's do that.
That psychology is so important in business interactions, and it's helping people to feel they have they have a vested interest in the solution, that they're part of the idea that's the ultimate solution. So instead of saying we should do this, and say, what about if? What do you think if? What's wrong with this idea? Work in that angle,
Okay.
but
I'm sorry,
you know,
I gotta.
Yeah, please.
I think you're absolutely right, but let me give you the Riolo version. Sorry, Frank, I gotta give away some of your secrets here. The key is he would let everybody work themselves into a hole, and Frank, and I don't know how to put it. I don't know how to put it
Toss
right,
them a
the right
lifeline.
way or more politically correct, but the key is when they're down underwater and they can't breathe, you hold them down until they come up right where you want them to come up. That's a Rioloism right there.
Now that actually was you coming into my office and said, I finally figured it out. You hold down everybody underwater until they can't breathe. Then you let them come up and they go, okay, thank you. Yeah, we're in.
Oh man,
that's hilarious. Yeah. So I cut you off, Frank. You were about to tell us one of the other benefits that you took away.
Well, the other is that you had the two ends of the spectrum, right? You had ultra rich, ultra educated, and you had not rich, not educated, a whole different culture. So I worked with those people every day because they worked. I won't say they worked for me, but we worked with me. And we worked together because lots of days, like one of the things they built down there was the shopping center. Well, I was in the ditch, with them digging it. I was in the deal pouring concrete with them. I was framing with them. We were doing all that stuff. And I got to know them really well. And so I think when you have the ability to interact with somebody that's walked 1,000 miles across the desert to be a U.S. citizen, has a second grade education, and you can communicate and understand them, and then you can go over at dinner at night and sit down with the chairman of the board of May Company or Merck and have a conversation and be one of them. Like, that's pretty priceless.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a real gift. That's a real gift.
And it's just listening, right? You just listen. You gotta listen.
Absolutely. So many people who are successful are really quite happy to give away their knowledge if there's just the will to listen.
Yeah, and I like mentoring. I mean, I mentor a lot nowadays. But.
So we'll be right back with more from Frank Riolo.
Are you tired of working outside in the heat? Do you hate your boss? Do you want to get paid to sit on your ass and talk for a living? Well, if you answered yes to the last question, then voiceover might be for you. But if you think it's as easy as buying a microphone, hooking it up to your computer, and all of a sudden you're gonna get paid, think again. It's just like your mom told you. You gotta go to school.
You gotta go to school.
And you need to talk to actor, voice actor, director, and producer Jonathan McFadden of Prodigy Talent Training.
I'm Jonathan McFadden.
Jonathan works in the business, so he knows the ins and outs, and he can help you excel in the field you want to. Audiobooks, animation, video games, radio ads, and of course, voiceover. But you can't wait around because classes fill up fast. So get over to calendly.com/prodigytt. Yeah, that's a weird word. Here, I'll spell it. calendly.com/prodigytt. Click new student interview and pick a time that works for you. So listen to your mom and go to Prodigy Talent Training.
You gotta go to school.
And we're back on the Outspoken Podcast with Scott and Curtis, and our guest today, Frank Riolo, who is giving us the benefit of his wisdom, gained in the deserts of California with all kinds of spectacular mentors. Frank, you were sharing with us the invaluable benefits of being able to work with and communicate with and learn from folks on both sides of the educational spectrum, both sides of the business success spectrum, if you will. And that it sounds like it just did you a world of good. How did you take that knowledge forward into your future endeavors, and how did you and Scott end up connecting?
Well, when I was in Borrego, one of the things I got involved in was all the community things, and I was interested how to make the community better. And I'd made a list of things I thought the community should have, right? And then started pursuing them. So sewer system, zoning, a bank. And one of the things on the list was a bank.
Did you have a model city? Like, were you looking at Palm Springs and saying we should model that? I did some work for a small town in Texas called Edinburgh that they were trying to do a top 10 All-American City campaign, which we eventually won. But we targeted Dallas, and we said we want to model Dallas. Did you do something similar for Borrego Springs?
No, I just made it up. I was just sitting around thinking, like, what do you need to do to get this done? Like, if you want to build something, well, you got to have a source of capital, right? We should. How do you borrow money? I didn't know how to borrow money. And so I was like, well, we probably should see if I get in the bank. So I went to the bank and I tried to borrow some money, and I wanted to borrow less money than I had on deposit with the bank to build a house, and they wouldn't give me a loan. And I decided, well, that's not very good. We should get a local bank that we have local control. And just things like that, right? How do you make the community better? How do you make the school stronger? How do you make a better place to attract and maintain?
Hang on. You just kind of tossed that line off there. Let's back up. So what I heard was, you just go start a bank.
Yeah.
Well, so
do you want to unpack that a bit?
I'll give you some quick background first. There's a couple of things that Frank truly does better than anybody I've ever met. And one of them is, especially I would say earlier, before he accumulated all this knowledge, he was always the best researched guy in the room. So he knew he had to go up against guys and figure it out. So he researched the crap out of it. And when he showed up, he knew what he was talking about. And then number two, the guy's a freaking amazing poker player. He just knows people. He knows people, he understands them, and he sees a group or someone in a group, and he knows how to work with that person to achieve his goals. He just does. He's good at it.
Well, you got to unpack this for me, guys, because I mean, I've done a lot of things, but I've never started a bank. So clue me in. How does that work?
It works a bunch of different ways. I mean, you can actually just get a group of people together, put a bunch of money in a pool, and put a plan together and go to the FDIC or the state and apply for franchise.
There's a pretty set process for it.
Yeah, it's very well established. What happened for Borrego was, it was on my list, but it wasn't something I said, oh, let's go start a bank. I know a bunch of guys with money, whatever, which I did, but again, the problem with the retirement community is nobody wants to go there and work. They want to go there and retire. They want to go there. So they're willing to support you. They just don't want to do any work.
Right.
So a group came into town from San Diego that had this formula they were doing in those days, and it was in the early 80s. And banks were growing and expanding in the nation, and particularly community banks. And they were from San Diego, and they wanted to come in and they wanted to start a bank in Borrego, and they would own 50% of the bank, and 50% would be owned by the local community. And it sounded really interesting. So I went down and said, hey, I'd really like to get involved. And I went to a meeting and I talked to them all, and they basically told me, get out of the room, kid, because I was like 29, 30. And they wouldn't let me get involved. But I had been involved in everything in the community, and I was sort of the fix-it guy. So everything that wasn't working or that they had a problem with, I'd go in and fix and work on, and we'd get it moving. And it was a great.
Did any of your Sicilian background come into play there, Frank? Saying, "Oh, you want your plumbing fixed? Yeah, I could make that happen."
No. It was all. Again, the great thing about a small town, right, is it's got all these problems. It didn't have any resources. Yeah. So if you show up and say, well, hey, I'd like to work on this problem, everybody goes, yeah, no problem, go for it, right? It's not like the city where you go in and you got to compete. Like, oh, no, you can have whatever you want. You can do whatever you want. And then if you do it okay and you don't really make too many enemies and you actually get it fixed, then they just, the next time you say it, they just give it to you. After that, you just do them. You don't even have to ask, right? Well, when they got around to after trying for 6 months to form the bank, they showed up at my job site one day, and talked to my dad, and he kept telling him, no. My dad was Frank Riolo too. And he kept telling them, no, it's not me. And they were trying to talk my dad into coming on the bank, the board of directors of the bank, and to help him raise money, because everywhere they went in town, they told him, well, unless you have Frank Riolo involved, we're not gonna be engaged, right? And particularly the common guy, right? Not the super wealthy guy, but the common guy in
Yeah.
town. And finally, my dad said, "Get down here." I was up on the roof, sheeting the roof. Get down here and talk to these guys. They won't listen to anything. And I got on the ground, and it was the chairman of the president of the holding company and number two guy. And they said, well, we're trying to talk your dad into being on the board of directors, but he was refusing. And we've been told everybody, we have to go, we have to get Frank Riolo, or we're never going to be able to raise all the capital. And he said, but he keeps telling us it's you, and it can't possibly be you. And I said, well, yeah, it is me. And they were like, well, okay, would you be interested? I said, are you sure? Because, 6 months ago, I tried to join you, and you told me to get lost. And they were, they were like, oh, yeah, we thought you looked familiar. And then he said familiar. Well, I wanted it really bad, right? Because it was like, hey, how does a bank work? Like, I have no idea, right? So I drove those poor guys crazy. I wanted everything. I wanted to know how everything worked. Every time I go, you got a book, you got a this, you got a that. I drove nuts for like 3 or 4 years, and the bank started struggling a little bit, and then it started struggling a lot because the economy changed, and banks were really small town bank, right?
What year did it hit the troubles?
Well, the bank opened up was founded in November of 1982. Mm-hmm. The organization was like 81 to 82. So
it was a bank, not an S&L, right?
Yeah,
it was a bank. It was a state chartered bank, chartered FDIC insured. And then in the kind of the 90s, late 80s, early 90s, the economy shifted and the real estate market shifted, and most of these banks were all heavily real estate related, and they started having trouble, and this bank and the parent bank were having trouble with their real estate loans. And the FDIC and the state, examiners were coming in, and they were reclassifying loans and requiring more capital. And this was a really small bank with limited amount of capital. And the worse it got, the more I got involved in it as a director, because we didn't have a lot of management depth. And there were real estate loans, and I was a real estate broker, and I was a kind of contractor. So, I understood the business and how to help make the loans better, or how to take them over. If you had to take them back, I could take them over, finish them off, put it back on the market, and we could get out of the deal. We could work out of it. So I started doing workouts, and in that process, this group of really young FDIC examiners came in one day, and they were pretty aggressive. And the one guy that was pretty interesting, I would say, because I didn't know anything, I would say, well, okay, I don't get it. Like, what is it you want? If you just show me what you want, I'll just do it your way. Like, I don't need to, I don't need to know how to
hassle.
I don't need to invent anything. If you just give me your form, I'll fill it out so it looks just like, you can just photocopy it and put it on your letterhead. Like, I don't care. I'll do whatever you want me to do. And the only guy that would actually explain to me, because I remember one of them was, where's your DCF? And I go, what's a DCF? Like, I don't even know what that is. And he's this guy, he says it's discounted cash flow. I go, well, I don't know how to do a discounted cash flow. I don't even know what that is. So this guy, young guy, shows me how to do it. And then he shows me what their forms are, blah, blah, blah. And I started working on all this stuff. So the next time they would come in, I would have it looking more like they wanted. Well, that was Scott.
First you make up a terminal value. Then you work backwards.
Well, I realized that's exactly what they did. I didn't know you were supposed to do that, right?
Well, wait, isn't that complete guessing? Yeah, but it looks real official.
No, the funny thing is in this time, here was all these guys from San Diego who thought they were amazing, and they were the bank guys and they knew everything. And in this interim, and Frank was this guy that was, okay, we'll bring him along. And it quickly became, here's Frank up here. And these guys were lost and had no idea what to do. And Frank was the only guy that really wanted to try to fix things and like, what do I need to do to fix things? And so he was great to work with.
And Scott, when we talked in a previous podcast about your journey, this was at the time you were a federal bank examiner, right?
Correct. Yeah.
This is after your semi-pro tennis playing days and
yeah,
air traffic controlling days and all that.
Yep. Yeah. And Frank, and funny enough, Frank plays tennis too. So we started playing tennis here and there, and started talking more and more.
Awesome. So this led you guys to another chapter that I want to explore when we come back from our next break. But I want to hear how you guys went from Borrego Springs to the gaming world, and how that led us back to Frank's story with the Indian tribe. So we'll hear more about that after our. Stay tuned for more of the Outspoken Podcast with Scott and Curtis.
Cool.
A modern take on a classic tale. A quest for revenge and to save the world from evil incarnate. Dracula Retold by S.G.D. Singh, an audiobook available now on Amazon, iTunes, and Audible. Will a group of wayward and unexpected heroes have what it takes to prevent the end of life as we know it at the hands and teeth of Count Dracula? Start listening now to find out.
And we're back with the Outspoken Podcast. Scott and Curtis, brought to you by Prodigy Talent Training. Fascinating guest today, one of Scott's oldest buddies and a friend, mentor, and just all-around fascinating entrepreneur, Frank Riolo. When we last left our heroes, they were stuck in the middle of the desert in Borrego Springs, building a bank. And from there, after righting the ship on a bank that had hit a little bit of trouble, after righting that ship, they sailed off into the Vegas desert, I believe. You guys want to tell us about your journey?
Frank, you got to start with VA Haas and how that came about, and then transition to Goldman. Probably.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we certainly were trying to right the ship, but we had one kind of really major problem. We didn't have any money, and we needed
a problem when you have a bank.
Yeah, truly. And we needed a capital infusion to get out from under regulatory control. And so, we had a business plan, and we were working on the business plan to make the bank profitable and the assets were under control. But we still needed a couple $1 million in capital to meet the minimum requirements and move forward. And, I know preparation and research and everything is understanding, but sometimes just being in the right place at the right time and stumbling into a blind luck really, pays off. And we literally had a group of people walk through the door and representing a Native American tribe not identified to us in an era when gambling was not legal in California. They wanted to buy a bank.
Wow.
And I will tell you, I thought there's no way this can happen. But gambling's not legal. I've read the regs. It doesn't make any sense. How are you going to take illegal money earned from illegal gambling, invested in a bank, all the money laundering questions, all the other things?
Yes, I say that sounds a bit like a Sopranos episode of money. Money
it was crazy. And when you met the guys that were coming and representing the tribe that were not tribal, you were pretty sure there was something not good going on. But I actually, after talking to at that time I didn't have a lot of options, so you'll talk to anybody.
Yeah.
And when they came in, they came in through the. By that time, I was the interim president of the bank, and they came in sort of through the old president who was let go, only because he was the one that they thought was the president when they called.
Wow.
And he brought him in trying to get his job back, which everybody quickly realized that wasn't a non-starter. And then I started dealing with him, and I thought it was just, well, you got to talk to him, right?
Right.
And one day I would just
especially if they're carrying big suitcases full of cash, right?
Well, they claimed they were, right? I'd seen it, but one night you wake up in the middle of the night and you go like, I don't have a choice, like I got nothing.
Yeah.
So maybe I can just keep this alive and bait and switch. I can keep the feds long enough to make money, find another investor. I've never heard of anybody doing that. Maybe I can just,
is that, Frank, because
buy time.
Is that because no one had never done it?
Well, it turned out somebody had done it, just nobody knew. It's like America, right? Did Columbus really discover it, or did you just be the first guy that told anybody about it, right?
Yeah.
And
Just had a better publicist.
successful at it. Yeah, right. And he got other people to come, right? I mean, that was basically. So when we got into the discussion about it, I thought, now, I don't have I got nothing else. I'm going to do it. So I told to buy time. I said, well, hey, look, we need to go talk to the FDIC and just make sure they're going to be okay with this. And so I called, and we went up to the regional office in San Francisco to meeting with the Western region director and all the staff and all what the heck, Scott, is the name of the group that's the minority and community lending and all that.
I don't even remember.
Me neither. I'm blanking on the acronym now. But we met with everybody, and we went into the meeting, and we're sitting in the meeting, and it's 2 or 3 tribal members who I'd met for the first time in the airport. There are a couple of attorneys and me. And they pulled me out of the meeting before it started, and I thought, oh, here it comes, right? They're going to know I don't know anything. I'm like completely making this up. And their question was, is it all right to address them as Native Americans or Indians? Is that okay? And like, I met them at the airport 2 hours ago, right? And the answer is, oh yeah, absolutely. Just be respectful, blah, blah. Treat them like, they're elected officials representing a sovereign nation. I gave them the whole speech, right? Which I had read about because I've been doing research. And we go to the room, and it turns out, no Google then, it was books. I had to go to the library. So I go in the meeting, and everybody loves it. They're going bonkers over it. Nice. And then they tell me the story that the controller of the currency, Gene Ludwig at the time, had spent the summer on the Navajo Nation. He saw how bad the services were for Indian country. And between him and the Federal Reserve, they had decided to make it an emphasis to have Native American banks reach out to Native Americans and help this get capital in the Indian land. And they've been messing with it for about 6 or 7 months, and they didn't know how to do it. And I walked through the door.
Oh my gosh. Wow.
With a bunch of tribes.
Wow. Talk about Providence. That's amazing.
And then it was, well, okay, you go back home and you're like, holy crap, I need to get over this. It won't work. This is going to work. Right? now, how does it work? I don't know how it works. So I, again, started researching, couldn't find a Native American group. So I called every region of the FDIC. I called half the state banking regulators in big areas where there's tribes, and nobody knew of any tribal banks, none. It turned out there was one in Montana, the Blackfoot Bank in Montana, but it was so small and so problematic, it never hit anybody's radar.
Wow.
And so the question was like, well, how do you become how do you deal with a sovereign nation? Like, how does the FDIC deal with the sovereign entity that only can be sued if they agree to be sued, or can only be governed by those banking laws if they agree to be governed by the banking laws. So after a bunch of conversation about it, and at that time I didn't have any money, so the bank didn't have any, we didn't have money to go hire the best lawyers. We didn't have a lawyer. I was doing most of it. And then as the story became public, one of the best lawyers in Southern California lived in San Diego and had a vacation home in Borrego, and he volunteered to do it for nothing.
Was that Kirk?
Oh my gosh.
No, that was Jim. Oh gosh, I should have rehearsed all my names before we started.
That's okay. That's okay. Not important. I'm just curious.
Jim Sterrett.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, but he was very helpful. But what I had done in the meantime was I'd figured out the only thing I could find was an agreement with Mexico and the FDIC and the Federal Reserve on Mexico and an interest in a bank. So I just took that agreement,
Wow.
and like I said, I've never been original in my life. I took that agreement, edited it to what I thought it ought to read like, and I put together what I thought the process ought to be like based on the process that they have, and I gave it back to them. And fortunately, by that time, the guy that I was working with thought it was pretty good, and he helped me. And
Wow.
he took an ownership in it at the FDIC. You remember him, Scott? You remember him? Yeah. We worked all the way through it, and the FDIC was totally in support of it. They actually were helping us with it, and we were a state chartered bank, and the state did not want us to be successful. They did not want the bank to be successful. They did not want a tribe to own a bank. And at that time, the tribes were not compacted for gaming in California because
that sounds very un-California-ish.
Yeah, the governor did not want it, and he refused to negotiate. And so the tribes were suing the governor for bad faith.
Was that Brown?
No, it was Wilson. Pete Wilson.
Interesting.
And no, Jerry Brown was actually very pro-tribe. He was quite friendly and quite helpful. And while that lawsuit was going on, I wanted to convert the bank charter to the OCC, and I wanted to get away from the state because they were blocking us, and the tribe refused. And so we made a deal on them putting in the capital, and basically what they did was what you said. They said, how much money do you need? I told them. They gave us like 50% more than I asked for. They put it on deposit in the bank immediately. I asked them how much they wanted to own, and they said 51%. And I said, great, you're in. They could have owned the whole thing, but they agreed to 51% because they wanted the local community to remain engaged. So it was more thought than they were just really nice. They had a whole process thought out. And then I said, well, that's really great, but I don't know that I can survive if they put the dogs on me long enough to get this through. And if you walk away, the bank fails. Mm-hmm. And they said, well, how much money do you need to keep the bank from failing and to meet the FDIC agreement? I told them, they said, all right, that's liquidated damages. We want to fight. We want to win the fight. And we want to show them that we can operate the most heavily regulated environment in the country. And we can do it well, and we can be good at it. And we want you to do that for us. And so I said, great. So we went to fight, went to war. And it for 18 months. To a point where we ended up in hearings before the Assembly and Senate in California, and they subpoenaed state banking for obstruction, and sanctioned them. And at the end of the hearing, the tribe told me, "All right, go ahead and convert the charter." And I called the OCC the first part of October 1995, and the FDIC walked me over to the OCC with all of their files. Gene Ludwig stepped in, called the regional director. Scott and team, we worked on the application with Mr. Sterrett, and we started in the second week of October, and we filed it on Thanksgiving. And on literally the day before Thanksgiving, and on Christmas Eve, we got chartered.
Wow. Wow. That's amazing. So just a bit of banking geekery. When you say converted to OCC, does that mean that it was a federal charter instead of a state charter?
Yes,
Okay.
exactly. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, exactly.
So how did you go from the Borrego Springs bank saga to Vegas and Goldman?
Well, what in the interim in there, where we really went from it was like, now we have a bank safe because we've been working on Safe Bank, and we worked on getting into the SBA business. So we did that really well, and that was our foundation. And then, we're looking around Indian country, it's like, wow, what are the banking services do the tribes have that they need? It was like, well, you can go to a casino sometime, particularly in those days, and you wanted to get $20 out of the ATM, they charged you $4 for it. And it's like, we need an ATM business. Hey, nice. Scott. That's where Scott went from doing what he was doing. He was like, Scott, you're now in charge of ATMs and whatever we got to do that. Go figure it out. You're the most techie guy we got. You go do it. And so I was learning Indian country and how to do blending and operate with tribes and sovereignty. And Scott was working on the cash advance systems. And we ended up with a really successful bank that did ATMs, check cashing, and credit card services in casinos, and a really good SBA department.
Wow. And
a pretty good Indian group. And our whole idea was somebody's going to buy us because we're worth more as parts than we are as a whole. But the tribe really liked it, and we had the majority of our board was tribal members and community members from Borrego and San Diego. So we were about half and half, and we had a big board. We had an 11-person board. And the tribal members were the leaders of the tribe, and they really liked what we were doing. So as we were doing things, they didn't want to sell, but as we were doing things, they would come with their problems from the tribe. Yep. And we would work on them, and we'd help them with that. And I was doing most of it because I was kind of the point guy. And over a period of time, they just kept giving us more and more. And finally, I said, well, hey, we got a little problem here. We're, like spending too much time on the tribal stuff. And, we got this fiduciary duty. And they said, oh, no problem. How much do you think you're spending? And what do you think it costs? And I told them, and they actually doubled the amount, said, okay, we're going to give you a consulting contract, but we want you to do all this stuff for us. So they actually became another revenue source for the bank, put the bank on. And we did a bunch of stuff. Yeah, go ahead.
The problem was if you look at the statements that go to the feds or FDIC or whatever, they have the income sources, laid out exactly how it works. And we had pretty normal measurements until you get to that line that says non-interest income. And it was like better by far than anybody else anywhere. It was nuts. And I think that freaked them out.
It freaked them. It did. We ended up having all kinds of problems trying to explain it to them.
But I think we made
it. Even though
we made it to like
mantra, their mantra at that time was you need to increase non-interest income. It's like, no problem, dude. We got it.
And I think, Frank, we successfully argued with them for like multiple examinations first, like 2 of them, I think. But it's the third one where they were like, they walked in the door. I'll tell. They just walked in the door and said, you need to divest of this whole non-interest income area. And I started to argue and they're like, shh, don't talk to me, divest. And then.
And it's just because the ratios for them were out of whack. They had never seen it. And the logical response would be, well, how many banks do you know that are, engaged like this with an Indian tribe and these type, a very unique bank. They didn't want to hear it.
We tried everything. And we actually won that argument for the first 2 years. We beat them so badly with logic and those arguments in the first couple exams that they came in the second one, they weren't going to listen anymore.
Yeah. When you're a big number on some spreadsheet that's expecting a small number, somebody somewhere is going to pitch a fit.
Yeah. You're making too much money in this area.
Yeah. So how did that take you to Goldman?
Well, what happened was we kept doing more and more. the tribe asked me to take over all the operations.
Yep.
And
Wow.
to leave the bank. And I said, well, I don't sure I want to do that. You know, I'll take over your operations, but I'm going to keep running the bank because if you decide you don't like me, I'm going back to the bank.
Yeah.
And we worked out how to do it, and they were great. They gave me a lot of autonomy.
Mm-hmm.
So I went in and I took over the casino and all of their economic development and pretty much everything, and reorganized the casino, reorganized how the tribe was doing its stuff, diversified them.
That's not light either. Taking over the casino was a huge job already because it needed to be managed well. But there was this whole other tribal side, the tribal trust.
Yeah, Frank's describing like 4 or 5 jobs in that kind of,
exactly.
I mean,
the tribe side
sentence
is a huge job.
I just took over their casino operations and kept the bank and, economic development and,
Yeah, that's Frank.
Yeah, that was pretty much it.
It's like
it
6
was
people,
pretty
dude.
crazy. It was, yeah. Fortunately, I'm a Gemini personally, but it was nuts.
No, well,
I worked really hard and crazy. That was kind of crazy for a little while.
Yeah,
for a while.
But
more than
they
a
loved
while.
Frank because Frank he listened, and he gave him good feedback, but he treated him well and with respect and understood the culture well, and also understood and talked a lot with the elders there was a couple of them that were amazing, and just rose his status in the tribe and in the casino, and it was pretty cool to watch.
So I wasn't part of it. I think this is worth just taking a moment before we head out to our final chapter in this story. But I see so many people coming out of business school and reaching the executive ranks, and I see so many young folks who look to Harvard, Stanford, business schools, Wharton, all fine schools, but it's almost as if they expect those schools to bestow some sort of magic powers upon them. Mm-hmm. And if only they have that degree, then they can divest of all common sense when they enter the business world. Mm-hmm. And corporations, can just, executives can just issue edicts and magic, mm-hmm. I issue the edict, magic, higher PE ratio. And it's just, your story, I think, Frank, is so compelling because it reinforces the idea that the best experience, there's no fertilizer like the shadow of the farmer, right? It's the best experience is getting in there, doing the work, understanding how things work, and not being so not being humble enough to learn and say, I don't know the answer to that question, but I'm willing to learn, and applying yourself to the answer, and having the best interest of the client at heart.
Well, I think that's number one, right? Having the best interest of the client at the heart. I think you got to have a servant's heart. You got to recognize it's an inverted pyramid. You're not on top, commanding people. You're on the bottom, trying to get them to go your way and try to hold them up. And if you really want people to follow you into dangerous territory, they have to respect you and they have to want to follow you. They don't follow you because you're the CEO.
Right,
Curtis, this
they
is
follow
exactly
you because they like you, right?
This is what you and I talk about all the time. There are many Fortune 100, 500 companies, and they have still this command and control top down. And Frank is not that way at all. And to be honest, he spoiled me for the rest of corporate America, Fortune 500 level, because they don't think in that manner. But when you watch what Frank does, he because he is the way, well, besides just relentless and really working hard, an amazing work ethic, but he attracts people who want to work with him, and it's just amazing. And what he does, I tell you, what he did for me that was amazing was he gave me enough rope to go out there and make a few mistakes, and I'll tell you something about that in a couple minutes. But he really just gave you a goal. He mentored you, and then he let you run, and it's like, and it's amazing. And he's got this huge following of people that were mentored by him. That if American business just understood this better, corporate business, then they would apply this model because it works, and they don't.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right, Scott. I think that so much of corporate leadership these days is just completely servile to quarterly earnings reports. And I think so many businesses, so many Fortune 500 businesses are set up really to serve that master and none other. And there's just this line of management that that is just reacting
And
constantly
powerless.
and powerless. So they're handcuffed, and their earnings, are tied to their bonus. So there's just an immense lack of courage. I don't think there's a lack of smarts or a lack of innovation or a lack of vision. But I think, the nature of the beast, right? If you're like a football team, if you're in a bad system, it's hard to win no matter how much talent you have. And the other thing I hear in Frank's story is, Frank knew that, if all else fails, he could go back to building houses or, roofing or whatever it was. He had a lot of options. And I think keeping those options is also a part of business success, because, you can tell people.
If you follow Frank, you know that so much that he does starts, you think, well, I'm going to be this, but I'm not going to be this forever. How many times, Frank, has construction served you as you went from the Viejas to the Goldman Sachs to the Stratosphere? I mean, how many times has that being a carpenter and a roofer and a ditch digger helped you?
Every day. It's nuts. They can't even explain it. It's a little bit. I was supposed to be a construction guy because I couldn't find a job. And my dad said, you're going to do this for a year or two, just so you know enough so people can't bullshit you. Everything I walked into has turned out to be like, it's full circle, right? I'm working on 200 houses, and community center is pretty much the last big job I'll do, right? I mean, it's nuts. It's full circle. But when I walked into Goldman, they were having problems with their construction stuff.
The Stratosphere, by the way.
The Stratosphere. And we were doing, and I talked him into finally letting me do some work. And we were doing it. And one day, one of the Goldman folks, one of the junior ones, said to the top ones, like, I don't understand why we don't let Frank and have Frank's guys do the rest of our jobs for us, because they get more out of a nickel than we get out of $10. And we started doing their jobs for them. So I took my guys, I formed a little shell side company called Stratosphere Development, and we started doing being the owner's rep for Goldman on their hotel remodels around the US.
Was this part of the banking relationship, or
no? This is when I went to VA, took over Viejas. I really built the business up, and Viejas had two objectives. They told me they wanted to be one of the most powerful tribes in California, and they want to be one of the most influential tribes in the US. And we got them. The casino grew tremendously. Their influence grew tremendously. They were diversified across the country. We did the only real deal where multiple tribes have invested in an asset on fee land. We built a hotel in Washington, D.C. Because I thought it would be really influential on helping the tribe with influence and access, and it worked great.
Yeah.
But tribes are elected bodies, right? And at the end of sometime leadership changes. Mm-hmm. And when the leadership changed and it went in a direction where I didn't believe they were doing, it was going to work. And I fought with them for a while. And I finally gave in. And, at the end of the day, it's their government, their assets, their decision. And I left. And when I left, I literally left on a Thursday at 11 o'clock, and on Friday morning at 9 o'clock, the tribe Lytton called me and asked me to be a consultant for them and help them do their stuff. So, and in the meantime, another tribe called me and said, I guess I decided I was going to take a summer off because I'd never had a summer off. This was like the end of May. I'm going to have so Scott, I talked Scott into going out buying a couple of kayaks with me, we're going to go kayak. Which I used the kayak once and damn near killed myself, and ended up going back to work. But another tribe wanted me to go to New York with them and meet with Goldman Sachs and to talk to them about, they had read in the paper that Goldman Sachs had bought a hotel company in Las Vegas And one of the hotels was the Stratosphere, and they really wanted to go, and they wanted to know if Goldman would let some of the tribes invest in the Stratosphere. And because I was the only one that had done did tribal deals like that, would I go with them? And I told them, I don't want to go. It's not going to work. It's a bad idea. They're not going to talk to you. They're in a blackout period. I gave them all and they wouldn't listen. And finally, at the last minute, I decided I'd go anyways. So I went with them, and we went into the meeting, and Goldman did exactly that. But after they sold that, they wanted to be polite because they didn't want to blow off the tribe or the other people with the tribe. And they didn't know so they started talking about gambling and how gambling works. So I spent 45 minutes talking about big gambling. And I left the meeting and I went downstairs and I said, I'm really sorry, but I just got my next job. They go, one was like, oh, this guy's going to hire me to run that company. They go, oh yeah, right, whatever. Well, I stayed in touch and I kept talking to them. And 6 months later, they called me and asked me if I would meet them at the Stratosphere to go over their problems they were having, because now they owned it. They were having management problems. The economy had tanked. It was 2008.
Yeah.
And I said, well, okay, when? And they said, well, be available. And I said, about 20 minutes, because I'm actually across the street working on another deal at the Hilton Hyatt, or the Hilton, Las Vegas Hilton. And so I walked through the property and thought, wow, man, this is a mess. And looked around and I talked to them, and I told them what I thought. And I kept working with them for a while. And then finally one day I just said, hey, look, I'm a consultant. Either hire me as a consultant or I'll take over your company. But I'm not talking to you anymore otherwise. Yeah. And they fast forward, we won't give you all the gory details. They finally agreed to hire a guy from Indian country, because you don't go from Indian country with 6 years in gaming to running a strip downtown multi-casino operation. It just doesn't happen, right?
Yeah.
I don't have the pedigree. I didn't come through MGM or Caesars or Stations. I don't have 20 years in the business.
Yeah.
And literally when they asked me how to justify it, I said, look, only thing I'll tell you is you can find 1 million of these guys. They talk better than me. They look better in a suit than me. They're taller than I am. I mean, you can find 1 million of them, but you can't find one that's ever worked in a competitive environment in a down economy.
Mm-hmm.
And you have a down economy in a competitive environment. You don't have anybody that knows what to do. And that's all I've ever done.
And then Frank promptly went and outperformed them all.
I did.
Yes, in a down economy, the Stratosphere outperformed everybody else.
Yeah, we did. And the plan was really simple, right? Is go in and clean up the operation. Mm-hmm. Get the people in the right spots, which wasn't firing everybody. It was moving some people around. It was retraining some people, and it was bringing in some outside people. And then I said to Goldman, it's like, can you tell me when the economy, they go, when are we going to get better? I go, well, can you tell me when the economy is going to get better? Because here's my plan. We're going to keep improving all this stuff with the idea that we're going to collide with a recovering economy. And when we do, we're going to outperform the market by 30, 40%.
Yeah.
Because we're already set. And we did. We crushed it. And had a really great run. And then they came and said, well, we think we were only going to be in this asset for 5 years. We've been in it like 10. We'd like to sell, and I all along had said I think we should sell at this period of time, and my guess is it's kind of like 2016, 17. Like, I don't know, I'm making it up, but it just kind of looks like the curve's gonna, we're not flattening, so people are gonna think it's gonna keep going. So we should get out under the greater fool theory, right? Let's sell. And so we tried. And it didn't go well. And I asked if I could help and drive part of it. And myself and a couple of the guys on my team, we picked out a couple of clients, and we started our own little non-sale process.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And we ended up selling the company.
Business development, we call that.
Yeah. And we ended up selling the company, and Goldman did really well. And in that ride, they were really good to me. They did a bunch of things that I never thought I'd get to do. So, I mean, I'd never been exposed to Wall Street. I didn't know how it worked. I didn't know how to, raise major amounts of capital. I learned all that with them. Was pretty successful at refinancing the company multiple times. Had a good following on Wall Street with the other investment bankers or other investment firms, and they got me involved, in helping them with their hotel remodels. So I learned a ton about hotels and resort operators. So I would go out and look at stuff, and then they also let me look at and help them with any gaming financing or any gaming transactions. So I got to look at all those and work with them on all those. As I was the only operational person, the new ops, and then they also had investments where they had a couple of casino investments where they needed somebody that's licensable. So I represented them on some boards.
Wow.
And it was great. I mean, it was a great education. They were wonderful.
I mean, it sounds like you were a Swiss Army knife for them, Frank, and you're one of those rare finds. They really lucked out in finding you, and you likewise benefited from the relationship.
Well,
but
I lucked out in finding them too.
Yeah,
VS, VS was a godsend, Litton's a godsend, and Goldman was, right.
You said something that I thought was really interesting, and I know we need to let you go here. You've got you got wine to sample and all that kind of stuff. But one of the things that Scott and I have experienced in the corporate world very often is this disconnect between upper management. And again, this I'm talking Fortune 500 world. I think mid-sized companies are better about this, generally speaking. But upper management, very, very, very focused, typically very, very focused on revenue, particularly in the past 15, 20 years, and shockingly less on things like free cash flow and actual margin. Right. But, top line numbers. And folks driving those top line numbers and PE ratios and earnings, but shockingly little attention paid to operations. And you mentioned that you were the only ops guy with experience. And ops is not sexy, but because it sounds to me, if I play back what I heard from you, it sounds to me like your general strategy at Stratosphere was go and get the L on the P&L under control and grow your margin by shrinking the L, right? And then when the economy comes roaring back, the P will take care of itself. Right.
Well, exactly, because as long as you control that base, right, and you improve your margins and you price accordingly, all that's free cash flow, right? Because you covered all your fixed expenses, and the variable component of renting 500 more hotel rooms a day is minimal, right?
Right.
So your escalating profit is wild.
Right? And you also did some tactical. Let's do a small chunk. We know it's going to take this long. Let's do a tactical amount of improvements each period, so that you could meet that line that you said when you knew the economy would turn.
Yeah, I wasn't going to get any extra cash, right? Goldman was not going to put any extra. They'd already overcommitted to the transaction, so I needed to build out a free cash flow, which was fine. So you just laid it out of, and as long as you kept improving the operation, you had more free cash flow, which meant you could move the needle faster, right?
So everything after that is free money, basically.
Free money. It basically is, right?
Free profit, yeah.
So great. It's all I tell everybody is like fix the base first.
Yeah.
Don't worry about the revenue. Fix the base first, and then go for the revenue.
And Scott, that's very much in our world, although we are typically engaged in ethereal stuff, ephemeral stuff, I should say. With software and things like that, those types of operations, but the principle is the same, right? The Kanban lean principles, the idea of, get your base operation in order, and increase your throughput and your margins against that, and the profit will kind of take care of itself as the revenue comes in. That's good stuff. Hey, Frank, I want to thank you so much for being so generous for your time. I know we kept you over, and we could go on for
Curtis,
days.
Before you go, I got to say one more thing, because I think so. So when I was with Frank and he was mentoring me at the bank, I struggled in the beginning. hit my stride. Honestly, felt like a complete star for a long time. But there was a moment where Frank gave me some rope. I hung myself and made a couple pretty big errors in judgment, or one major error in judgment. And he gave me a piece of advice that I've given others many times. And it was just truly an amazing piece of advice. Frank, do you know what it is?
I'm not sure what you're talking about exactly.
Okay.
I can guess, but I'd rather hear you tell me.
Yeah. So the piece of advice I said in this darkest time, it was not good. And I could feel those walls closing in. And Frank just looked at me and I said, Frank, what do I do? And he just looked at me and he said, dude, you just got to weather the storm. And I thought that was, at the time I just listened because I was like, I need something. And I hung on it. And he was exactly right. You just got to weather the storm sometimes. When the shit hits the fan, you just got to weather the storm. And like I said, I've shared it multiple times with other people, and it was truly profound at that time. And anyway, I'm very thankful for it.
Well, I've gotten more polished at delivering that message now. Now I say it's like, stuff happens, right? Bad stuff happens, and it happens to everybody. But it's not the bad stuff that happens; it's what you do after the bad stuff happens.
Yeah.
Right. Show your character. Be solid. Be humble. Go forward, and it'll be behind it. Right? Everybody. Yeah. We all make mistakes.
Yeah.
It's about character. Show the character after the mistake.
For sure. And that's a great message, and again, it's something that I think you see more in small businesses, and you see more in small to mid-sized enterprises, but sometimes it gets lost up in the major leagues. People don't want to show their ass, and it's a problem.
Yeah, although I will say I would put my time with Goldman. And and some of the stuff they had me doing is pretty big time.
Mm-hmm.
I think I got to the big game
for sure. For sure.
And they weren't what I had been told they were. They were much more compassionate. They were much more human. They're competitive as hell, right?
Yeah.
They don't cut anybody much slack, but at the end of the day, they were good. They were generous, and they were understanding, and they worked towards a common goal. And one thing they did that I didn't expect was they gave, because I'm not a short-term quarterly guy. I don't function well in that environment because you can't do the right thing.
Mm-hmm.
And they gave me time to let me do the right thing, and they never pushed me out. They were very supportive. They gave you the time to fix the problem.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, it's great.
Well, good news. Maybe there's hope.
I think there's hope for everybody. I mean, the tribes have been great too. Right? I mean, at the end of the day, they're an emerging group, right? Yeah. That went from nothing to wealth, and learning how to deal with wealth and management. Wealth is a sharp curve, and some of them are really good at it. And the tribe I work with is pretty damn good at it. They're pretty solid.
Good stuff. Well, from work boots to Armani shoes, that's our story with Frank Riolo. Still New Balance.
I got more expensive tennis shoes than hiking boots, but
there you go. Hey, Frank, it's been a pleasure. It's fantastic stories. Love to hear more, and maybe we'll catch you sometime out in San Diego.
Sounds good. Thank you. Or up in Sonoma.
Okay. Yeah. Or up in Sonoma, even better.
Thanks so much, Frank.
All right. Thanks,
good stuff.
Thanks. All right. Are we done?
We are done.